Welcome back and thank you for staying with Morning Express, 40 minutes past 6 a.m. In case you're just joining us, we want to take a look at the latest developments, some of them touching on the economy, even as the dailies actually anticipate tougher times for Kenyans in terms of the debt crisis in the country. Well, we want to delve deeper into this. Still with me, Bunyasi Sakwa, who's the Member of Parliament for Nambale constituency, joining us via way of Zoom. Agri Chabeda, who's a governance expert, and last but not least, Philip Magal, who is the legal expert in this particular panel. Gentlemen, many thanks for your patience. Let's take a look at the latest in terms of reports around the debt crisis in Kenyans, even as Kenyans are still reeling from the news that the government acquired yet another loan from the International Monetary Fund on Monday. The facility is worth 262 billion shillings, and official figures indicate that the government borrowing hit record highs in December 2020, even as the pressures of the COVID-19 global pandemic weighed heavily on the economy. Now, our very own Brenda Kerubo spoke to various experts and now tells us why Kenyans should be concerned about the country's ever-rising debt.
By the end of December 2020, Kenya's public borrowing stood at 7.28 trillion shillings, and that is set to get worse. Just yesterday, Kenya inked a deal with the IMF that will see Kenya get 262.7 billion shillings for post-COVID economic recovery, raising her debt to a whopping 967 billion shillings, which is the sum total of the size of the Burundi, South Sudan, and Malawian economies. So just how worried should you be?
I'm not worried at all. The reason I'm not worried at all is because I do believe the leaders who are there are borrowing responsibly to develop the country.
Taxes will increase, automatically impact on our household level. Secondly, our business will collapse automatically because more things, people will not be able to purchase goods because of escalating debts and also the taxation issue which will be affecting their households.
Ishani affect kwa sababu sahi cost of living iko juu. Si wenyewe tumeshazoea mtu anakutolea hadi 500, unaenda nyumbani unakula unajua hiyo. Sahi hata mtu akikupea mbao ni Mungu.
The national debt level is a measure of just how much the government owes its creditors. President Kenyatta's administration has borrowed heavily since 2013 to fund huge infrastructure projects such as roads and railways. However, the pandemic has seen government to borrow more from institutions such as the International Monetary Fund to help it deal with economic challenges occasioned by the pandemic.
But the issue about debt is not about the accumulation of the total debt. I think the issue about debt is within debt servicing, because we have a very high cost of debt servicing. I think 56 out of every 100 shilling collect, 56% goes to paying debts that we've taken all these years.
Since the government spends more than it collects in form of taxes and other revenues, national debt continues to rise. And though most Kenyans may not understand public borrowing as a concept, they relate to the pain of increased taxes.
Tangu nianze hii kazi sijapata wakati mgumu kama huu. Najaribu naenda sokoni, ukinunua bidhaa ukikuja nayo hapa haiendi sawa sawa, kwa maana wateja wengi ni kama wameshajifungia.
Customer wangu wakikuja nawaambia vitu imeongezeka bei. Waongeze kama ni miji tulikuwa tunauza hii kamkepe 100. Sasa tunawauzia 150.
Majority of the national debt is issued in the form of government bonds, known as treasuries. But government intends to raise at least 123.8 billion shillings from bonds sold to foreigners. Some worry that excessive government debt levels can impact economic stability.
The problem is that we're having a government that spends a lot of money, a very ambitious government. And so we read our budget that we cannot afford. So we find ourselves that you're reading a budget of more than 3 trillion, but your revenues in terms of taxes is 1.5, that's half. So you find yourself that you have to borrow part of that. I think the problem is that we have an ambitious government in terms of spending, and that's where the problem is. Unless we scale down in terms of our spending in government, we will never get out of that problem of debt borrowing.
According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, the economy contracted by 5.7% in the second quarter of 2020. This is due to coronavirus. Now, as the government chalks up more debt to try and salvage sectors that have been battered by the pandemic, for Kenyans, it will be a long road to recovery. Brenda Kerubo, KTN News in Nairobi.
So that just coming in the backdrop of the latest in terms of the approval by the International Monetary Fund to give a fresh loan to Kenya, 261 billion Kenya shillings is that particular amount under a 3-year program. And we just want to discuss about this, bearing in mind that some of this come with but when we have dwindling revenues on one side, when we have issues to do with debt servicing, and of course the high spending within government, what do you make of the latest in terms of the borrowing move by the Kenyan Treasury?
I think it was inevitable. There was really no way out for the Treasury but to start borrowing money to finance recurrent expenditure. There is nothing wrong with borrowing per se. The problem usually is whether you can afford to pay. Now, IMF is what they call it's like a last resort kind of lender. And therefore, when you go to them, because you really cannot get that kind of financing elsewhere. They do have their conditions. I've seen in one of the newspapers today, they have listed, there are 3 listed. One of them is you've got to reduce your own spending. In other words, you can't expand your budget. Secondly, you must find ways to reduce expenditure in order to live within your means. And one of those ways usually is to try and trim the size of government. We've seen here parastatals have been mentioned in terms of the numbers, and I'm afraid some of parastatals may have to be trimmed by being either closed down, and there'll be a lot of job losses. One of the other conditions that I've not seen here, which we were experiencing much in the 90s, and my suspicion is it's there, but it hasn't come out, is the dollar shilling. Very often they expect you to depreciate the value of the shilling against dollar because we purchase most of our requirements are imported and they're in dollars. And by doing this, the theory is that it will whet the appetite for imported goods because they will go up, and at the same time it will make our exports cheaper and in theory increase the demand. Whether that actually happens or not, personally I believe it's never really worked well. But what it has always brought is lots and lots of pain to the economy and to everybody.
Okay, now let's speak about the ongoing projects, Philip Magal. What do you make of it? Roughly 1,600 ongoing projects. Needless to mention, we have the electricity last mile project, national expansion of irrigation schemes, just to name a few. But what's usually put to question is the fact that some of them remain less than 50% complete, and also the return on investment factor. What do you make of this?
I am a beneficiary of some of the projects undertaken by the government. I come from one of the far-flung areas in this country, that is West Pokot, and if you come there today, you will see roads, you will see bridges, you will see that the electricity lines run to the borders of this country. I mean, we have a road going across Swam to Uganda. We have electricity in a place called Swam, a place my grandmother lives, and I thought, I never thought in my wildest dream that we'll have electricity there. The question now is to how to help those people realize the potential that has been brought about by this development. Now, you've brought electricity to the ground, yes, but what if the connection rates are high? What if the monthly charges are high? The government should work on helping the common mwananchi make full use of these things, if it is electricity. And to me, this is where the rubber meets the road. For us to spur growth in this country after the effects of the pandemic, we should lower the cost of electricity because everyone uses it. Should it be the lady by the roadside making chips? Should it be the young man who's opened a kinyozi? Should it be the one running a video show? Everybody needs electricity. And in order for us to cushion Kenyans and enable them realize what would otherwise be low-yielding projects is to lower the price of electricity. Once we have Kenyans fully or maximally utilizing these people using the roads to go to their farms and farm and bringing produce to town, we should then be able to tax these people and be able to pay these debts. As you are well aware, one of the chronic issues facing this country is failure by some people to pay their taxes, or what we call tax avoidance. Yeah. And we have the biggest of us refusing to pay taxes. We've had a debate here some few minutes ago on whether or not the MCA should pay tax on the grants they are receiving. The biggest companies in this country have come up with ways to avoid paying taxes. We should have people paying taxes. If we have this done, then I'm sure the pain of these debts will be relieved. Another issue, of course, is corruption, which I don't want to go into because, you know, we talk corruption, we live corruption, and we know the impact that it has had on the economy and the impact it is having on our need or our ability to pay the debts that we've already accrued.
Well, it definitely has an impact, especially in terms of devolved corruption, what we hear in terms of that. Let's cross over to Sakwa Bunyasi. Even as we speak right now, it comes in the backdrop of a review in the fuel prices, which have definitely gone up. And also the state is also planning to raid into the taxpayers' pockets in order to fund an even bigger budget. What's your reaction when we hear all this in terms of the debt just acquired, in terms of the rising cost of living, knowing very well inflation is tied quite substantially to the cost of fuel in this country? What do you make of it?
Thanks very much, Jesse. First of all, Jesse, let me start by commenting on the significance of the IMF intervention and then deal with the consequences, including those around inflation, around cost, as you have correctly analyzed. Kibaki avoided this kind of IMF support, but there was always IMF in the background. IMF works with many governments, even though they don't need to borrow, in terms of helping them maintain a stable and ongoing framework. And Kibaki understood this quite well. He tried to keep his expenditures within the realm of the revenues they were receiving, maybe with a deficit, yes, some deficit, but a small deficit that did not rise to the levels where we have reached. I think he understood it well. The first government of Jubilee also began to understand it by saying, hey, we are developing a high component of recurrent, including a wage bill that's unsustainable. And for a while, it was a front page kind of discussion. But that's how most modern economies do it. When you're out of keel, when you're out of balance, you work it back. You should work on the wage bill. But now you can see we've completely thrown that out. And now instead, we have a land of the last resort, as one of my colleagues has correctly said, who is a surgeon and doesn't worry too much about giving tablets over time, comes in with a knife, to cut and sew and rip lamb and so on. That's what the IMF does. IMF says the expenditure are way out and the revenues are down. How do you bring the two? You have to increase revenue, which means increase taxation, increase cost sharing, and you can cut expenditure by delaying or cutting out certain projects that are not either high return or of the immediacy that is needed. Now, we have that capacity. I know Kenya has that capacity to deal with these adjustments. They don't have the will. So using the push of the IMF, because now they are the funds and we are down on our knees, so we would accept. We now all say IMF has said. When we know well, we could have said the same thing, but we don't have the will to make those adjustments. So I think that's unfortunate. But what happens now is going to be that costs are going to rise because you have to increase your share of costs. Inflation will also rise. Prices are going to go up. As you know, increase fuel by 5%, by 10%, and maybe the prices go up by 50%. So that is going to spur more inflation. It's going to be a very difficult period for what we say common mwananchi. But these are all things that we expected. And I think we can also add here that a big budget is not necessarily a good budget. It must be an affordable budget. And I think that's what Kibaki understood That's what the Jubilee government has refused to understand. But they don't listen to the technical experts. I know that for a fact. They ignore them. And that's very, very unfortunate, because this thing needs to be managed. And it's not rocket science. Even at home, if you right now, with Fleaser, I think you can explain to people easily. If you can't pay your bills, what people are now doing is you get a new number, you get a new Fleaser, you add to it, but you don't even tell your wife or children that you owe that much, until the day, one of these days, they might walk in and perhaps auction your furniture or something like that. I don't think they'll go that route, but it may be worse. So governments are also under the same kind of watch, and when I sometimes say, give us the goodies, give us the goodies, we never ask who is going to pay for the goodies. Let me conclude on the question of devaluation. In the 90s, we were administering the foreign exchange administratively. They fixed a rate, and we operated around that rate. So to move from it was conscious that you are devaluing, that you are making your currency cheaper to foreign currency. But now it's a market-driven thing. This is happening every day. You wake up in the morning, check your paper. One day the exchange rate is 100, the other day it's 105. In the old days, that move would have been big headline news. But because now market-driven, it's more muzzled. It's still there. We have to deal with it. And we are lucky in Kenya that our diaspora gives us much more money than IMF does, than IMF has given us, because they give it to us without conditions. So that is saving us also. So we are in for a hard ride, and I think we need to get a little more sober and look carefully at projects we have got that we think we have to do now.
All right, even as we speak about sobriety, I mean, Agri, I just want to rebound on the fact that you mentioned, the importance of debt in terms of growing a country, but the management of this particular debt is what is usually put into question. We did mention the fact that corruption is a sore issue, but I mean, with the Jubilee government actually giving a firm reason, the fight against corruption will definitely push for stricter penalties for those who engage in economic thievery. What do you make of the journey in terms of muzzling corruption as it is, especially what we now know as devolved corruption, quote unquote, that eats into, what is known as the shareable revenue, and very few goes into the development projects?
The issue of penalties, I don't take very seriously. It's just similar to that hustler issue we were discussing earlier. We have a tendency to try and throw the law at problems, but we don't actually solve the problem. I think if we tackled the corruption problem, even if, let's say, the rate of corruption, whatever it is, if it was 50%, it dropped by 20, 30%, it would release a huge amount of funding for the government to do what they're supposed to do. However, I think the bigger issue is we need to find ways of collecting more revenue from a wider tax base. I think too few people are shouldering the burden of taxation in the country. Rather than do that, I think the easiest thing sometimes that the KRA will do is go after the people they already know on their books by simply increasing the taxes. For example, there is this one tax that is set to be introduced or has been introduced where you are to pay, companies are to pay 2% of their turnover. I think it's a ridiculous tax because I think it will just encourage non-compliance. Because if you start a business and you don't make money, you can't be expected to pay.
Okay, that's interesting. What do you make of this, Philip Magai? Because we have the issue of KRA barely hitting their target, this in the backdrop of an ever-expanding national budget. What do you make of this?
Yes, KRA, of course, I will agree with the Agri that needs to expand the tax base. Almost 100% of Kenyans are above 18 years are productive. They do earn an income one way or the other, and all these people should be roped in to pay their tax because they enjoy the services provided by the government, and the burden should be borne by only 10% of Kenyans. But even going further, if you look at the devolved system, they are purely looking to the national government for revenue. Yet they could expand the monies they collect by way of rates and business licenses across the counties. But they have neglected that. Most of them don't even have enforcement officers. They don't go to the centers. They don't charge taxes. They don't collect anything. At the end of the day, what they budget on, what they depend on, is the little that is given to them by national government, which is in turn collected by KRA. That is one loophole that we ought to seal. If you look at this 10 trillion debt that we've accumulated over the last 3 years, most of it has gone to devolution. Most of it has gone to making this our complex constitutional framework work. The devolved units ought to look at self-sustenance. They ought to look at take policy measures. They ought to enact legislations to see to it that they are able to control their markets, they are able to tax people, they are able to collect revenue that then can augment what the central government is collecting. Otherwise, I can assure you that the national government will be forced to borrow if at all devolution is to remain with us. Otherwise, devolution will be the death of this country.
Okay, but even as we speak right now, Sakwa Bunyasi, it comes in the backdrop of just the release of next year's budget draft estimates. But even as we speak about this, borrowing domestically, I'd like you to speak a little bit sense to this. How exactly does it stifle the private sector and the business environment locally?
Yeah, good, Jesse. But just allow me to respond to my colleague who has just spoken. The devolution has had very little to do with our debt. The amount of money we spend on devolution in total as a percentage of our budget is less than, if you look at it, that was less than 10% per budget. This has gone to the mega projects and it's gone to wasteful spending, including corruption in it. But let me go back to the point that that you are raising. The borrowing from banks is regulated by the central bank. How much you can lend depends on how much you have in deposits. So if you, let's say, had a unit of 100 units, 100 shillings, that's a bad example, 100 billion, how much you can lend? The central bank says, to be sure that you can meet your obligations, a certain amount must be kept on deposit and kept with the central bank. And you can only lend such, they give you that ratio that you must keep and what ratio you can then lend.
Okay.
That amount that is lendable is what is available to the entire economy, public sector, private sector. When government borrows heavily from these monies, you take away from what the private sector could have used. And you take it away and put it in government services. But for the economy to grow, the private sector is very important to drive the economy, including household expenditures, but also including corporate and mama bogas and everybody. So by allowing government to borrow more from the domestic sector, you take away the funds that are allowable to be lent, allowable under the central bank rules from the banks. So you crowd out the private sector, as they say. The last thing, Jesse, on the same thing, is that when banks prefer to lend to government, reason being that it doesn't cost them much. It's a deal around the table, and you give X billion to the government, and you hold their paper as evidence that you gave them, maybe a bond or a bill, as they say, and governments normally pay because they can print money. To lend them the same amount of money takes field offices, analysis of these proposals, follow-up for debt repayment, so they don't want to go that way. So they go the easy way. They find it easier to lend to government, and that's the problem. When borrowing by government increases, banks will follow suit because they can easily collect money, and they refuse to have to worry about the rest of us. And it's the rest of us as private citizens, as entities that grow the economy, that grow our food, that do the businesses, that do the import and export transactions, that grow the economy, the trade and so on. So that's why it's important where government borrows from.
Well, that's really notable. Gentlemen, even as we conclude this particular discussion, I'd like us to shift focus away from Marta's economy. Let's just talk briefly about the Building Bridges initiative and the progress so far. Keen to note is that West Pokot and Trans Nzoia counties have actually approved the BBI bill. Busia also doing it earlier on, Pokot and the likes. But in terms of public participation, something important happened happened just yesterday in terms of the Nakuru County Assembly. They did mention that they would participate, they would do the public participation in the sub-county level, not in the assembly chambers. What do you make of the journey so far in terms of BBI Agri-Chabeda? It seems for every 6 counties that approve it, 1 seems to reject it.
I think the strategy appears to be those who are supporting the BBI are encouraging the counties that support this initiative to go ahead and debate it and vote on it. My suspicion or my take is that they want to get to the 24 county threshold early, so that it becomes a non-debate for the ones that are still discussing the bill. So far, those are the indicators from what I'm seeing. There's been a bit of acrimony, of course, in Baringo was particularly a very unfortunate incident where there was a lot of physical confrontation. These are not necessary. I don't know how Nakuru County plans to do their public participation. I'm sure they have a plan. But eventually, whatever they do, the law is such that they still have to come to the legislative chamber and vote on it.
Okay. Philip Magal, what do you make of the politicization of this particular Amendment Bill 2020? Is it possible to separate the contents from the politics that is, especially as we build around the 2022 general election?
It is, and what I'd like to tell my fellow Kenyans is, but before I even go to that, let me first of all congratulate the West Pokot County Assembly as led by Professor John Lonyangapuo by quickly passing the bill. You know, West Pokot is one of those marginalized counties that would really use the 35% allocation. They would really use the devolved, the county development fund. They would really use some of those proposals in the BBI bill. That said, though, we ought, as Kenyans, to be able to separate issues. The fact that you support Ruto doesn't mean that you have to automatically oppose BBI. The fact that you support Raila Odinga doesn't mean that you necessarily have to support BBI. The world is not black and white. There are gray areas. We ought to be able to look at issues separately. We ought to apply relevant reasons to them. You know, whether you support Raila or Ruto is irrelevant to whether BBI should pass. You ought to look at the proposals therein, whether or not they do have an impact on your life, positive or negative, and on relevant considerations, either decide to support it or not. Okay. But we have a situation whereby Kenyans, you know, first of all would look to their leaders. Like I heard at some point people saying, you know, Raila has read the bill, so I'm not reading it. Right now we are seeing people talking of multiple choice questions. If you ask them why, it's because Ruto has said so. I mean, if they don't support the bill, they should come out clearly and say, we don't support the bill, but don't muddle the waters by saying we want a multiple choice question. The insincerity, the dishonesty in our political discourse really doesn't serve to push us forward. Instead, it ties us behind.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Sakwa Bunyasi, as we conclude on this, perhaps even as you add your voice on what we've observed in the county assemblies, the referendum bill was definitely deliberated on just yesterday, even as Parliament does extend till 9 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Talk to us about the clamour around the referendum bill, the COIC side and the JLAC side, in terms of the format in which to approach this particular referendum.
Just this, before I go to that, let me just comment also very briefly on the previous question. I think it's healthy that some counties might not willing to go along and others will go along, and I think we should allow that and then have a studied approach later as for what the issues were, what the circumstances were. The problem there is in this process, this particular process, but also our general legislative process, is the commercialization component. That monies change hands before people lean one way or lean another. And most of these monies are coming largely through governors and others who seem to have a lot of money on the side to do this kind of thing. collectively, of course, is something they have agreed to do. I think that's very unfortunate that we are not allowing these assemblies to make their own decisions. But be it as it may, we will see how it all turns out. Now, in Parliament, there were two competing bills, as you had in your startup, as you said correctly. One by the Constitution Implementation Oversight Committee, which is a committee set up in the Constitution to help oversee the implementation of the 2010 Constitution. And generally, it will be a standing committee that will be looking at the way the Constitution is being implemented, seeking to facilitate its implementation. But then there was also the legal side, the so-called JLAC, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, which seems to have been the one in the mainstream that came in running from behind and said our version of it is what is closer to what we need, and we must move very quickly because we have the referendum that we need to do coming up very, very quickly. So there was a bit of tension there. Finally, the two committees agreed, they sat down and agreed, but there is also a proposal that, as it happens now, the jurisdiction should have allowed each of the bills be discussed to near finalization. Then they would have been harmonized. Because when you discuss it deeper, you get into the specific meaning of the components of each clause. And then you can, at that moment now, say this is superior, this is better, this is easier, this is more integrative than the other. But you don't run roughshod about the other. So you lose a lot in doing that. But that's what's happening. We had a detailed discussion yesterday. When we left at 9 p.m., we had not quite completed yet. I think we'll be at it today again.
Okay, we'll definitely
anticipate... No, today, sorry, I'll be tomorrow.
On Thursday, yes. We'll definitely anticipate those deliberations as we monitor the legislation in terms of the referendum bill. But gentlemen, many thanks for your time. We have to call it enough at that particular point. Definitely deliberating on matters BBI and touching on the economy as well, which are major highlights in this particular week. Bunyasi Sakwa joining us by way of Zoom, who's the Member of Parliament for Nambale constituency. We also appreciate Agri Chabeda for your input right here, governance expert. And last but not least, Philip Magal joining us after quite a while, a legal expert and helping us add impetus in this particular issues we were discussing. Let's take that short break right now. 13 minutes past 7 a.m. We'll be back with the latest in terms of health, as is the usual on Wednesdays. To stay with